You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots.
Special guests, Stephanie Adler, Melanie Nelson, and Casey Holst. Here's your host, Ryan Argenta.
Welcome back to the Engage podcast. We've been getting a lot of questions, a lot of feedback from Delta pilots and their families about the strike authorization vote. So today I'm here with Stephanie Adler, Melanie Nelson, and Casey Holst. They are all spouses of Delta pilots. Stephanie has been through quite a bit. She's been through the strike in 1998. Her husband, David, is a New York A330 FO, and he's also the Delta MEC secretary. Stephanie, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Hope I can be helpful.
Absolutely. I also have Melanie Nelson. Her husband is a Salt Lake City 220 FO, and together they've been through the UNA process. They've been through the pandemic, and now they are up against a strike authorization vote. Melanie, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to get into it.
And last but not least, Casey Holst, newlywed. Congrats on that. His wife, Marissa, is a New York 220 FO. Thank you for being here and congrats on the recent marriage.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. You bet.
The point of this is to get spouse questions answered. Stephanie has been through strike authorization before. She's been through an actual strike, the Northwest strike in 1998. You've been through bankruptcy, merger, COVID, pandemic, and now here we are, strike authorization. Stephanie, what's your perspective on the current strike authorization and any differences between 1998 and today?
The most important thing to know is that this is really the moment. We all try to be supportive of our spouses at work and they of us. But this is the time when the rubber meets the road. It's just really important to understand that management is looking at this as the moment where they come to understand what kind of support that there is for the negotiators and what kind of support there is behind all the pilots, what their families really think and how they support them. And I remember very similar feelings 23 years ago, which seems like a long time ago now, but this brings it all up. But what we need then, as we know now, is while there might be some short-term pain, the long-term gain of it will just so far outstrip that financially. And this is the moment where we show management that we are all supporting each other as a group. And that's what unions are about. We're all working together. And that has not changed, even though in the great wide world, unions have lost some strengths over the decades. But it's coming back. And I hope this can be one of those moments.
Yeah, I agree. That was really well said. Melanie, what is your perspective on this? Travis has been around for a few years, but he's relatively new. You were marked as UNA. You're marked for furlough. You lived through reduced pay during that time and probably some uncertainty on your end. And now you're faced with strike authorization vote. What's your perspective on this? And what are your questions for Stephanie?
Just to feel confident that we're not going to be hung high and dry because we've been there the last few years. Going through COVID was really reassuring that the union has our back and they're going to make sure that we get what we need. Going through COVID, not only did we have lower income for the last few years, I just graduated from grad school. So we're also racking up a ton of debt while I was in school, which is a little intimidating when, he had lower income for the last little bit and now he might also get in that position again. So main concerns now, are we actually going on strike? What's going to happen if we do? Do we lose our income or benefits? Those kind of questions.
I don't want to step too far into the technical, not being a union admin person myself, but I can say I totally understand your apprehension, Melanie. When this happened to David and I, he was just coming off having worked at a regional airline for quite a few years. The pay then at regionals was very low. It wasn't the situation that it is now. The hiring wasn't happening. And it was just a different world. He had only been at Northwest for about a year and a half. We had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, and hence I was not working. Trying to plan ahead as best we could, just in case a strike was called. We started getting our ducks in a row in terms of how could we make up for the short term some income to keep the family going. I started checking in with family members who could take care of the kids if I had to go out and work. We just tried to do whatever we could to mitigate the circumstances ahead of time. Fortunately, the strike only lasted about 2 weeks and we never really had to get to that point. And there was a strike pay involved. can't possibly remember how much that was. It wouldn't matter in today's dollars. Anyway, Cobra was available to us. I believe those things, Ryan, are still the case in this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. If we get to a strike, every striking pilot who participates gets a monthly stipend. Again, in episode 18, the admin mentions a couple numbers. You can reach back to that and check out episode 18. But it's enough to pay the bills. It's enough to pay the mortgage for the period of time that you would need to. And you're right, you get Cobra. So there are resources, there are benefits available if we go on strike.
Something that was really important to us, which was my husband David became a group leader for the strike preparedness committee. And that was huge for us. Having the knowledge of what was going on, he was part of disseminating that knowledge. Understanding where you're at and exactly what's going to happen is really important. I just feel like in a void of knowledge is always a scary thing. So do the best you can to stay very informed. Super important. So David was leading a group of pilots in our region in the Northeast. There was a lot of camaraderie. There was a lot of family support. We would get together and just have picnics and dinners and people could do to feel like they were supporting each other. It was really important. And we're still friends with those families today. I mean, those are some of the longest standing friendships that we have. And I know those people would be there for us no matter the circumstance. You go through a thing like that and you don't forget that. So if you have opportunities to get with other families and feel that support, that's really important and take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And you don't have to wait for a strike to do that.
No, you don't.
You could start doing that now.
Yep.
And perhaps that's a good time to bring up the family awareness website that the Delta MEC has. I'll link that to the podcast description so you can click on that. But there's a wealth of information on the family awareness page. It talks specifics about the stipend, about healthcare, about saving and spending money, about the resources available to you. It answers the questions, some of the things that we've brought up here, but it's about getting that information, about getting all that knowledge so you can make the right decision for you and your family. Again, voter participation is hugely important. We're not telling you how to vote, but getting that information and making the right decision for you and your family is important. And that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this. We want to support you through that. Casey, what are your concerns and what's your perspective?
I've learned a lot through Marissa and long term. As a spouse, what are we invested in by supporting this yes vote? What things do you think will be improved, preserved during the contract negotiations?
Stephanie, why don't you take this one from your experience? What were the gains?
Well, of course, there was a pay increase, but there were other things that were really big too. At the time David was hired, Northwest had a 5-year fee scale. So for the first 5 years, you only made 50% of what an A scale or pilot who'd been there longer than 5 years would make. And that was reduced to 3 years, which was big. Aside from big pay increases, that was huge for us, especially at that stage in life when we had a really young family and I wasn't working, and not just the pay percentages, because the rest of it is important. Also, I think at the time before the strike, Northwest pilots were qualified on 2 or 3 airplanes. So enormous amount of stress in that. And after the strike, only 1 airplane. So, much like what pilots live today, but that wasn't the case then. That was a big deal, trying to maintain being qualified on 2 or 3 airplanes. The stress of popping in and out like that, that's a big work life stressor. So keep your eyes on all the prizes. It's really important.
Casey, what things are important to you and Marissa? What are you looking for as a return on investment for a strike authorization vote?
I'd say that one of the biggest thing is just less fatiguing schedules. Granted, she's brand new. Through friends that also work for Delta, I've seen it and experienced it, but definitely the fatiguing schedules seems like that's one of the big bullet points in my opinion. And also the work rules. It's very important to continue to strive for improvement there. Pay is always big. Pay protection, obviously, with some of the regional contracts that have just been published as of late. It's humbling, and I just hope that improvement happens in those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And in reality, it's about time that the regionals pay what people have earned, right? What they're worth. But it shows the majors that in order to attract, recruit, and retain solid pilots and solid people, they've got to compensate them appropriately.
It is retirement, obviously, with inflation and everything that's going on in the global economy, trying to keep up with rising prices of everything from groceries to gas. Is the retirement going to continue to keep up with current demands of inflation and everything else in the global economy?
Yeah, these are important things that the negotiators are working on. They've closed quite a few sections, but now we're into the major economic sections of this. These are the hard cost items of pay rates and compensation and contribution to the 401k, retirement benefits. So it's definitely an investment. Asking a relative new hire to support a strike authorization is a big deal. And voting in favor is sending a significant message to management. How many years does Marissa have left at Delta in her career?
Quite a while. Let's see, 35.
Yeah, 35 years. And it starts here. This is important for you and for Marissa, and you're along for the ride.
I think one of the other things that I noticed even just yesterday, she was still able to utilize that positive space. Is there any inclination of whether that's going to continue moving forward, or is that something that you guys are still fighting for? Seems like it worked really well.
Yeah, it does work really well. Super helpful for both the company and the pilots. I'll let the MEC chairman and the negotiating committee speak to that in their updates. However, it is sunsetting. It is going away on October 31st. I would imagine the MEC is talking to the company about keeping that around in some sort of fashion.
Yeah, cool.
And that helps quality of life, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's huge.
Melanie, I want to turn to you.
Yeah. One of my big concerns is when they vote on this strike authorization, is that vote going to be public knowledge for the company where they could have some kind of consequence for how they vote for this?
That's a great question. So the strike authorization vote, the results are known to the company. I mean, that's the point, right? We're showing management, look, we had 99% participation and X amount are in favor of strike authorization. The negotiating process is regulated by the Railway Labor Act. There's a process that we have to follow, and the company does too. If you're asking about retaliation, if you're asking about taking things away, well, we still have a contract that they have to follow and that the union enforce. They're not interested in retaliating. They are interested in finding the pulse of the Delta pilot group and operating within that pulse. And so a high turnout and obviously a high percentage of those in favor tells management, okay, these pilots are serious. We're going to respect that. And we're going to come in with a truly industry leading contract and we're holding them to it.
I would add to that. Yeah, I agree. At its core, they're a corporation and their first responsibility will always be to generate as much profit as possible for their shareholders. And so when they enter into these negotiations, they're just trying to find that sweet spot, so to speak, where they can generate as much profit as possible while satisfying whatever they can to keep the employees in a happy place. They're not going to give one thin dime more than that. No, they don't want employees to strike. That's bad for them, but they're not going to voluntarily give out goodies either that they don't have to. We're coming at it from one perspective, trying to provide for our futures and our families. That's the simple equation.
And we, of course, support that, right? We want the company to do well. We want the company to generate income. We're long-term stakeholders as employees. But there's a point at which corporations have to recognize the weight their employees take on. And I want you to think back through the uncertain times of COVID. Melanie, you and Travis were on the UNA list and you had to limp through that, so to speak. That was a union negotiated thing. If it weren't for the union, there'd probably been a furlough. Labor is a cost of doing business. And the lower your cost, more profit there is for the shareholders. And that's fine. But there is that fine balance. There is that respect where pilots helped lead the company through the pandemic. We've emerged. They're back to making within 10% of record-breaking profits. And they're saying, look, we leaned out our labor costs so well that if we just keep this going, there's more money for us. And that's just not right. That's not the right thing to do.
Right. Looking over 30 years at 3 airlines, having been through this many times, I can say that at many junctures, management has said, help us through this difficult time, and we will restore you to your former happiness, your former compensation. And in all of those 30 years and all of those airlines, it never happened once. Once you concede something, you're not getting it back unless through the hard work of negotiating it. That's just the way it is. So it's really important to understand when management comes saying, oh, help us now and we will restore you. It doesn't happen.
Well said. Yeah, that is the reality. That is true. And we have other podcast episodes that talk about it. One is titled, This Is Our Time. And it is.
We've kind of touched on this, but just because you're voting for this authorization doesn't mean that you're going to get to a strike either, right?
Yeah. My dad used to say, contract is only as good as the people who entered into it. And there is that element, right? There are still progress being made. There's negotiations still happening. And so if you view the strike authorization vote in tandem to what is happening at the table and in tandem to what the MEC is doing. So there's regular business. They're still negotiating. They're negotiating next week. Things are still happening. We're not at an impasse, but you do have to prepare. And I said this analogy in episode 18, our last podcast on strike. Maybe the three of you can relate to this. If you're on reserve and you don't want to get a trip, pack your bag. You have to pack your bag. You have to put a toothbrush in, get your razor and put it in your car. And you'll probably not get a call from scheduling to go fly a reserve trip. But if you don't, and you're out at a party or you're mowing the lawn, you know you're going to get a call. So this is the same thing. While normal course of negotiations, while normal course of business is happening, on the side, we have to pack our bags. And the Strike Preparedness Committee, the MEC, and the negotiators are asking us to individually pack our bag by authorizing strike. And I'll be clear that vote yes, that in favor vote simply authorizes the elected representatives. If they deem it necessary, then they can call a strike. So they're just getting ahead of the curve in doing so. So I will say that this is the one vote that individual pilots will have on strike. This is the one and only. It's just happening in advance. And we feel strongly and we hope we never get to that point.
Yeah. The way I'm looking at this is it sends the signal to management that we are very serious about improving our lives and our futures, that our negotiators have our full support. Show the company that we are completely behind the negotiators. There is no equivocation about it. We are very serious. And I think the best way to, in fact, avoid a strike is to vote in the affirmative for this. And that is the reason why, because it will show management that we are that serious.
Say that we do go on strike. If people do decide to go to work, how does that affect everything? How does that all work out?
Stephanie can talk to this. In 1998, Northwest just shut down the company.
Right.
They didn't try to operate. They saw it coming. They rerouted their passengers. They put out notices. I think Delta would probably do the same thing. Again, I think we can avoid this altogether.
Right.
I think savvy management and good humans at the negotiating table can prevent this from happening, period. They just need to know that the Delta pilots are serious and that the Delta pilots behind their negotiators. But if it did happen, no, I don't think they would try to operate an airline. We've had questions from probationary pilots. Probationary pilots, to be clear, unfortunately cannot vote. And then there's a slew of questions about what if you get off probation after the vote, but before the strike. And so if you're off probation and we do actually go to a strike, then you are fully authorized to participate in that strike.
Okay. And then one more thing, obviously we can't non-rev if our company is not flying, but how about Z benefits? Can we still hop on other airlines during a strike?
If Delta's not operating, then there is no flights to non-rev on. However, other carriers are fair game, including Z fares. And in fact, if a company is on strike, then other pilot groups, especially other ALPA pilot groups, step up to carry that lift to help pilots get from here to there. There would be picketing events, there would be strike events, there would be family awareness events. So there are ways to get around.
Perfect. Thank you.
What do spouses need? What do you need from ALPA?
Specifically, this podcast has been really helpful and eye-opening to what we would get. Like I didn't know before that we would still maybe have some financial help from ALPA during all of this. So just knowing what the resources are, having Stephanie here is a great resource. I love hearing your stories about what you've been through in the past. It's making me feel a lot more calm about what potentially is coming our way. Just more education and knowledge to help us through this.
Right. And what the status is, what's happening, what can we expect, stay informed. Not knowing what's going on is incredibly anxiety provoking. And everything you can do to keep yourself informed is going to make you feel that much better.
Absolutely. And we're continuing to put out education pieces and information. I think it's important to note that as a spouse or as a family member, ask questions. Ask the tough questions. You can call the strike center. You can call the union, 1-800-USA-ALPA, ask for the strike center. And we would love that. As a spouse or family member, or go through your pilot family member and say, hey, I really need this information to help best support you, and ask to listen to the other podcast episodes. I mean, they're on Spotify, they're on Apple. You don't even have to ask. Just Google the Engage podcast for Delta pilots. The union sends out a ton of written communications. As we get closer, the ballot window closes on October 31st. And once the results come out, there will be a lot more information that comes out. And we tell the pilots to stay engaged. And I'll tell the families the same thing. Stay engaged. This is a critical time in our career. We talk about it as a generational contract that we're in the process of negotiating. And Stephanie alluded to that as well. So hang in with us. Thanks for supporting us as employee, as a pilot. We can't do this job without our spouses and our families and the support that you've given us. So I want to acknowledge that. I know it's frustrating at times. I know it's difficult to be in an empty house or to be with kids without mom or dad around. We certainly acknowledge that and support the families.
Thank you. As families, we're in things together. As members of the union, we're all in this together. And as members of the airline industry, we all go forward in the end.
Absolutely. Stephanie Adler, Melanie Nelson, Casey Holtz, thank you so much for your support. And thanks for being here. Thanks for asking great questions.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah,
It
thank
was a
you.
pleasure.
It's been awesome and very educational. So thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
This has been Engaged, the podcast for Delta pilots. Thanks for listening. My name is Ryan Argenta. Stay safe and keep the rubber on the road.
You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or your favorite podcast platform, and receive notifications when a new episode is available.